It was a Tuesday evening like any other, or at least that's what I thought. I was sitting in the living room of our Parisian apartment, facing my mother-in-law, Elizabeth. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with a palpable tension that seemed to have been building for months, even years. Lace curtains filtered the golden light of the setting sun, casting dancing shadows on the floral-patterned walls. The incessant ticking of the old comptoir's clock in the corner of the room seemed to mark the countdown to an inevitable confrontation. Elizabeth, with her grey hair in a tight bun and her piercing eyes behind her gold-rimmed glasses, stared at me with a calculating gaze. I could feel his discontent, his constant disapproval that had poisoned our relationship since the day I married his son, Francois. "Marie," she began, her voice sharp as a knife, "we need to talk about the monthly allowance." I held back a sigh. We had had this conversation dozens of times before. Every month, it was the same refrain, the same demands, the same barely veiled reproaches. "Elizabeth," I replied, trying to keep my tone calm and collected, "we've already discussed this. €5,000 a month should more than cover your basic expenses." His face tightened, the lines around his mouth deepening. "My basic expenses? You dare call them basic expenses? Do you have any idea what it takes to maintain a certain standard in this city?" I felt anger rising within me, but I tried to contain it. I glanced at Francois, standing by the window, his reflection silhouetted against the glass. He observed the scene with an expression of boredom and disdain, as if he were watching a mediocre play that he had seen too many times. "Elizabeth," I continued, "I understand that you have needs, but..." She didn't let me finish. "Needs? Needs?" His voice rose in pitch. "I sacrificed my life for this family. I raised Francois alone after the death of his father. I worked day and night to give him the best education possible. And now that I am old, you would like to see me live like a beggar?" I felt my patience crumbling. Every word she spoke was like a hammer blow to my resolve. "No one asks you to live like a beggar," I said, my voice shaking slightly. €5,000 a month is more than most people earn." "Most people," she spat. "Since when are we most people? We are the DuPonts. We have a name to keep, a reputation to maintain." I looked at Francois again, hoping for support, intervention, anything. But he remained there, impassive, as if he were physically present but mentally elsewhere. This indifference hurt me more deeply than any of Elizabeth's words. "I can't keep doing this," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We can't keep giving you more every month. It's not sustainable." Elizabeth's face transformed from anger to cold, calculating rage. "Can't you? Or don't you want to?" She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You think you can come into this family and dictate the rules? You're nothing, Marie. Nothing at all." His words hit me like a slap. I sat there, stunned by the violence of his tirade. It was then that I saw his arm move, fast as lightning. Before I could react, she had grabbed the glass of water from the coffee table and was throwing it in my face. The cold water splashed over me, soaking my blouse and taking my breath away. In shock, I fell backwards, my chair wobbling dangerously before crashing to the floor. I found myself lying on my back, water dripping down my face, mixed with tears that I could no longer hold back. "You're going to pay, you dirty bitch." Elizabeth's voice echoed above me, full of venom and contempt. Lying on the ground, I turned my head towards Francois. What I saw made my blood run cold. He laughed. A small mocking laugh, a cruel smile playing on his lips. At that moment, I understood that the betrayal was complete. The man I had married, whom I had loved, no longer existed. Maybe he never existed. Drawing on a strength I didn't know I had, I slowly got up. My clothes were soaked, my hair stuck to my face, but I stood tall, determined. I looked at them both, this mother and this son who had conspired to break me. "You're going to regret this," I said in a firm voice, surprising myself by my apparent calm despite the storm raging inside me. "Both." Without waiting for their reaction, I turned on my heel and left the room. I crossed the corridor, ignoring Elizabeth's screams which pursued me. I grabbed my coat and purse from the hall and yanked the door open. As I crossed the threshold, I heard Francois' voice, speaking for the first time that evening. "Marie, don't be stupid. Come back here." But I didn't turn around. I slammed the door behind me and took the stairs 2 at a time. Once on the street, I took a deep breath, the cool air of the Parisian night filling my lungs. The city lights twinkled around me, like millions of earthly stars. I walked aimlessly, letting my steps guide me through the familiar streets of my neighborhood. Passers-by glanced at me curiously, probably intrigued by my disheveled appearance and haggard expression. But I didn't care. In my head, the events of the evening replayed over and over, every detail seared into my memory. How had I gotten there? How could I have let things get this bad? I thought back to the early days of my marriage to Francois, to the hope and love that animated me then. I thought I would build a new family, find my place. Instead, I found myself trapped in a web of manipulation and contempt. My steps took me to the edge of the Seine. I stopped on the Pont des Arts, contemplating the dark waters flowing below. The city lights reflected off the water's surface, creating a mesmerizing kaleidoscope. It was there, leaning on the parapet of the bridge, that I made my decision. I couldn't go back to that apartment. I couldn't continue living this life that wasn't a life. It was time to take back control, to fight for myself. Taking my phone out of my bag, I dialed the number of my best friend, Sophie. "Hello, Sophie. It's Marie. I need help. Can I come to your house this evening?" His response was immediate and unequivocal. "Of course, darling. Come right away. What happened?" "I'll explain when I get there," I replied, feeling a knot forming in my throat. "Thank you, Sophie. Really." I hung up and took one last deep breath, looking one last time at the Seine which flowed peacefully beneath my feet. Then, with a determined step, I headed towards the metro. A new page in my life was going to be written, and this time, it was me who would hold the pen. The next morning, I woke up on Sophie's couch, my body aching but my mind strangely clear. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, bathing the small living room in a soft golden light. I lay there for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of Paris waking up, the distant roar of cars, the clinking of cups in the kitchen where Sophie was preparing breakfast. The events of the day before came back to me, no longer like a blurry nightmare, but with crystal clarity. Every word, every gesture, every emotion was engraved in my mind. Strangely, I no longer felt the heartbreaking pain of betrayal, but rather a cold, unwavering determination. "Married?" Sophie's soft voice pulled me from my thoughts. She stood in the doorway, 2 steaming cups of coffee in her hand. "You're awake. How are you feeling?" "I stew." OD up, gratefully accepting the cup she handed me. "Better than I expected," I replied after a sip of piping hot coffee. "I know what I have to do now." Sophie sat next to me, her face full of concern and compassion. "Are you sure? Don't you want to take a few days to think about it?" I shook my head. "No, I've already waited too long. It's time for me to take back control of my life." After a quick breakfast of still warm croissants from the local bakery, I got to work. The first step was to secure my finances. I spent several hours on the phone with my bank, blocking joint accounts and creating new accounts in my name alone. Every call, every decision gave me an exhilarating feeling of freedom and power. Around noon, as I hung up after yet another call, Sophie suggested we go out for lunch. "You need to get some fresh air," she insisted. "Besides, it will take your mind off things." We found ourselves seated on the terrace of a small bistro in the Marais, the June sun pleasantly warming our faces. Around us, Parisian life was in full swing, tourists strolling around, cameras in hand, busy businessmen slaloming between tables, phones to their ears. "So," Sophie said between bites of her Niçoise salad, "what are your plans now?" I took a sip from my glass of Chablis, savoring the freshness of the wine. "I'm going to resume my career," I replied with a confidence that surprised even myself. "Do you remember that position at Renault that I told you about a few years ago?" Sophie nodded. "The one you refused to follow Francois abroad?" "Exactly. I'll contact them again. See if the opportunity still exists." The afternoon was dedicated to updating my CV and writing cover letters. Every word I typed on Sophie's computer was like a step closer to my new life. I reached out to former colleagues, mentors, industry contacts. Some responded immediately, surprised but delighted to see me back on the circuit. Around 6 p.m., as I finished a promising call with a former professor at the École des Ponts, my phone vibrated. Francois' name appeared on the screen. My heart leapt in my chest, but not from fear or apprehension. No, it was anger, cold and controlled anger. Maybe you should answer, Sophie suggested gently. At least to tell him you're okay. I stared at the screen for a few more seconds before rejecting the call. No, I said firmly. He doesn't deserve to know. Not yet. The evening arrived, and with it, a new wave of energy. I decided to go back to the apartment to collect some things. Sophie insisted on accompanying me, just in case, she said. The subway ride was silent, everyone lost in their thoughts. When we arrived in front of the building, I paused, my heart pounding. Sophie squeezed my hand in support. "Do you want me to ride with you?" she asked. I shook my head. No, this is something I have to do alone. But thanks for being here. The climb up the 5 floors seemed endless. Each creaking step beneath my feet seemed to remind me of the years I spent in this building. Arriving at the apartment door, I took a deep breath and inserted the key into the lock. The apartment was plunged into darkness. No Francis in sight, nor Elizabeth. A heavy silence reigned, broken only by the regular ticking of the old clock in the living room. I quickly went to the bedroom, took a suitcase out of the wardrobe and started throwing clothes, important documents and a few personal items into it. As I rummaged through my nightstand drawer, my fingers encountered a familiar object. I took it out slowly. It was our wedding photo. Francois and I, smiling at the camera, looking happy and full of hope. A wave of sadness washed over me briefly. Where had this couple gone? Had he even existed? A noise in the hallway startled me. I quickly put the photo in the suitcase and closed it. When I left the room, I came face to face with Francois. He looked tired, his features drawn, his eyes bloodshot. A 2-day beard darkened his usually so well-groomed chin. "Marie," he said hoarsely. "Finally, you came home. Where were you?" I was worried to death. I looked him straight in the eyes, searching for any trace of the man I had married. "I only found a stranger." "Really?" I replied coldly. "You looked so worried last night when your mother threw a glass of water in my face." He at least had the decency to appear embarrassed. "Listen, Marie, about last night. I'm sorry. Mom was upset, you know her. She didn't mean what she said." "And you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What were you thinking when you were laughing when you saw me on the ground?" Francois opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to find an answer. I grabbed my suitcase and headed for the door. "Wait," he cried, grabbing my arm. "Where are you going? We can talk about this, right? We can work things out." I pulled away abruptly. "No, Francois. We can't fix anything. It's over. Finished," he repeated, incredulous. "You can't be serious. Where will you go? What will you do?" A little laugh escaped me, without joy. "See, that's exactly the problem. You can't even imagine that I could manage without you." I walked around him and towards the front door. As I placed my hand on the handle, his voice reached me, thick with thinly veiled threats. "You won't get away with this, Marie. You have nothing without me. No money, no job, nothing. You'll come crawling back." I turned around one last time, looking him straight in the eyes. "You are wrong, Francois. I have everything I need. My dignity, my determination, and a future that is mine." With that, I left, slamming the door behind me. On the stairs, I met Elizabeth, who was coming up, probably alerted by Francois. She gave me a venomous look, opening her mouth to say something, but I walked past her without sparing a glance. Sophie was waiting for me downstairs, anxious. Seeing me come out, suitcase in hand, his face lit up with relief. "Did everything go well?" she asked. I nodded, feeling a huge weight lift from my shoulders. "Yes," I replied. "It's done." We walked in silence to the nearest metro station. As we waited on the platform, Sophie took me in her arms. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. The subway arrived. its doors opening with a whoosh. As we boarded, I took one last look back, toward the exit of the station, toward my old life. Then the doors closed, and the subway rushed into the dark tunnel. That night, lying on Sophie's couch, I couldn't help but smile. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of my life. A life that I was going to build on my own terms, my own rules. A life where I would finally be free to be myself. Sleep slowly overcame me, lulled by the familiar sounds of the city that never sleeps. Tomorrow would be a new day, the start of a new dawn. And I was ready to face it, no matter what. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of frenetic activity. Each day brought its share of challenges, but also small victories that strengthened my determination. I was still sharing Sophie's couch, but what was meant to be a temporary arrangement was starting to feel like a makeshift roommate. One July morning, as I was having my coffee on the balcony, savoring the morning freshness before the crushing heat of the Parisian summer set in, my phone vibrated. It was an email from Renault. My heart leapt in my chest as I read the first words. "We are happy to offer you an interview." "Sophie," I shouted, almost spilling my cup in my excitement. "Sophie, I got an interview at Renault." My friend stormed out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around her head. "Is that true?" "Oh, Marie, that's fantastic." She hugged me, sharing my euphoria. The interview was scheduled for the following week. The next few days were dedicated to preparation, reviewing the latest innovations in automotive engineering, updating my project management knowledge, and of course, choosing the perfect outfit. On the big day, I stood in front of the imposing Renault headquarters buildings in Boulogne-Billancourt, my heart beating but my mind clear. The interview went better than I could have hoped. My years of experience, coupled with my newfound enthusiasm, seemed to hit the mark with the panel of recruiters. 2 days later, I received a job offer. The position was even more interesting than the one I had refused years before, chief engineer on an electric vehicle development project. It was the opportunity one had been waiting for, the chance to prove my worth and take back control of my career. However, my joy was short-lived. The same evening we received the offer, while Sophie and I were celebrating over a bottle of champagne, my phone rang. Francois' name appeared on the screen. "Maybe you should answer," Sophie suggested, her expression changing from joy to worry. "He's been trying to contact you for weeks." I stared at the screen for a few seconds, weighing the pros and cons. Finally, I picked up. "Hello." Francois' voice was tense, almost unrecognizable. "Yes, Francois?" I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Marie, we need to talk. Face to face. It's important." I felt a knot forming in my stomach. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Please," he insisted. "Just once. Then I'll leave you alone if that's what you want." I glanced at Sophie, who nodded encouragingly. "Okay," I finally gave in. Tomorrow evening, 7 p.m., at the Le Procope Café. The next evening, I arrived at the café 15 minutes early. Le Procope, the oldest café in Paris, was a place steeped in history. Its walls had witnessed fiery discussions between Voltaire and Rousseau, and had sheltered secret meetings of revolutionaries. Tonight, it was going to be the scene of a confrontation of a completely different kind. Francois arrived right on time, as always. He looked tired, his features drawn, a shadow of a beard on his chin. He sat across from me, ordering a strong coffee from the passing waiter. "You look good," he said after a moment of awkward silence. I shrugged my shoulders. "I found work again," I replied simply. His eyes widened slightly. "Really? Where?" "At Renault. I start next week." A flash of something, jealousy, anger, passed through his eyes. "I see," he said slowly. "And when were you planning to tell me?" I looked at him, incredulous. "Tell you? Francois, we are separated. I no longer have to answer to you." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Look, Marie, I know things went wrong. My mother, she's difficult, I know that. But we can fix this. Come home. We'll start again." I shook my head, a bitter little laugh escaping me. "Starting from scratch? Francois, you don't understand. It's not just your mother. It's you, it's us, it's everything our marriage has become." His face hardened. What do you mean? I mean, I'm tired of being treated like nothing. I'm tired of having to fight for every euro, of having to justify every expense. I'm tired of your indifference, of your lack of support. Francois remained silent for a moment, digesting my words. Then, slowly, his expression changed. The facade of contrition disappeared, replaced by something colder, more calculating. Do you really think you can make it on your own? He said in a low, almost threatening voice. You forget that it was me who financed our life all these years. Without me, you are nothing. His words hit me like a slap, but I didn't let it show. On the contrary, I straightened up, looking him straight in the eyes. You're wrong, Francois. I have everything I need. A job, friends who support me, and above all, my dignity. He sneered. Your dignity? And how much is your dignity worth when the bills have to be paid? More than you think, I replied. And certainly more than all the money you could offer me. Francois stood up abruptly, almost spilling his cup of coffee. You'll regret it, Marie. You'll come crawling back when you realize how hard life is without me. I remained seated, calm despite the storm raging inside me. Goodbye, Francois. He stormed off, bumping into a waiter in the process. I stood there, sipping my coffee, looking out the window at the passers-by going about their business, oblivious to the drama that had just played out. This confrontation, as unpleasant as it was, had paradoxically strengthened my decision. I had seen the true face of Francois, stripped of all the masks and all the illusions. And I knew I had made the right choice. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I started my new job at Renault, diving headfirst into exciting projects. My colleagues were welcoming and the work was stimulating. For the first time in years, I truly felt like I belonged. At the same time, I started looking for an apartment. Sophie had been wonderful in hosting me, but it was time for me to stand on my own 2 feet. I spent my weekends looking at apartments, looking for the perfect place to call home. It was during one of these visits that I received a call from my lawyer. Francois had finally reacted to my request for divorce, and not in the most friendly way. He disputes everything, Maître Dubois explained to me. Property division, alimony. He even claims you owe him money for funding your lifestyle during your marriage. I felt anger rising within me, but I suppressed it. Very good, I said in a calm voice. We will fight if we have to. The weeks that followed were trying. Between my new job, apartment hunting, and legal battles, I barely had time to breathe. But each obstacle overcome was a victory, each challenge overcome made me stronger. One evening, when I came home from a long day at work, I found Sophie sitting on the sofa, looking preoccupied. What's going on? I asked, worried. She handed me an envelope. It just happened to you. It's from Elizabeth. My heart leapt in my chest. What could my mother-in-law want from me? With trepidation, I opened the envelope and took out a handwritten letter. My dear Marie, the letter began. I know our relationship has been strained lately, but please reconsider your decision. Francis is devastated by your departure. Our family needs you. Come back, and we can forget everything. I reread the letter several times, not believing my eyes. Was this a sincere attempt at reconciliation or just another manipulation? What are you going to do? Sophie asked gently. I crumpled up the letter and threw it in the trash. Nothing at all. It's in the past now. I'm looking to the future. That night, lying on the couch, I reflected on how far I had come. I had faced my fears, stood up to those who wanted to put me down, and I was rebuilding my life, brick by brick. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, I had confidence in the future. As I fell asleep, a thought crossed my mind. True strength comes not from the absence of fear or doubt, but from the ability to overcome them. And I was stronger than I had ever been. Autumn settled in Paris, adorning the tray of the Champs-Élysées with golden and copper hues. The days were getting shorter, but my life seemed to flourish more and more. My work at Renault was stimulating, pushing me every day to give the best of myself. I had finally found a small apartment in the 15th arrondissement, a stylish 2-room apartment with a view of a quiet park. One Saturday morning, While I was sipping my coffee on my new balcony, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Lucy, my younger sister. "Hey big sister, it's been forever. I miss you. See you soon." I stared at the screen, a wave of guilt washing over me. In the whirlwind of the last few months, I had neglected my family, my friends. It was time to rebuild those bridges that I had allowed to crumble. I replied immediately, "I miss you too, Lulu. How about we have lunch together tomorrow?" The next day, I found Lucy in a small bistro in the Marais. As soon as I saw her, sitting at a table on the terrace, a big smile lit up her face. She jumped up and hugged me. "Marie, finally," she exclaimed. "I thought you disappeared from the face of the earth." We sat down, quickly ordering 2 café crèmes and croissants. "I'm sorry, Lulu," I said, guilt showing in my voice. "The last few months have been complicated." Lucy took my hand across the table. "I know, Marie. Mom told me about Francois and you. I'm sorry not to have been there for you." I shook my head. "It's not your fault. I'm the one who isolated myself." We spent the next few hours making up for lost time. I told him everything: the breakup, my new job, my apartment. She listened to me attentively, her eyes sometimes widening in surprise, other times narrowing in worry. And now, she finally asked, "How are you feeling?" I think for a moment before answering. "Honestly, free. Like I can finally breathe after years of suffocation." Lucy smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "I'm so happy for you, Marie. You deserve to be happy." As we parted, promising to see each other more often, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Reconnecting with my sister reminded me of the importance of family ties, of those relationships that define and sustain us. In the weeks that followed, I worked to reconnect with other people I had neglected. I called my parents, spending long hours on the phone with my mother, listening to her concerns and reassuring her about my situation. I reconnected with old friends, organizing dinners, trips to the cinema, walks around Paris. One evening, as I came home from a game night with colleagues, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't know. "Hello," I replied, intrigued. "Married?" The voice on the other end of the line was hesitant, almost shy. "It's Antoine. Antoine Dubois. Do you remember me?" My heart jumped. Antoine Dubois. My best friend in high school, the one with whom I shared my teenage dreams, my first heartaches, my exam anxiety. We lost contact after high school, our lives taking different paths. "Antoine. Of course I remember you. How are you?" We spoke for over an hour, making up for years of separation. Antoine became an architect, got married, and had 2 children. "I heard about your divorce," he said softly toward the end of our conversation. "I'm sorry, Mary." "Don't be," I replied. "It was the best decision I've made in a long time." We agreed to meet the following week for coffee. When I hung up, I felt strangely light. Reconnecting with Antoine was like finding a part of myself that I had forgotten. The day of our meeting arrived quickly. We arranged to meet in a small café near the Jardin du Luxembourg. When I arrived, Antoine was already there, sitting at a table on the terrace. He stood up when he saw me, a big smile on his lips. "Married," he exclaimed, hugging me. "You haven't changed." I laugh. "Liar. I've aged 10 years and a few wrinkles." We sat down, ordering 2 espressos. The conversation resumed as if we had never left each other. Antoine told me about his life, his work, his family. I told him about my divorce, about my new start. "You know," he said after a moment of silence, "I remember this Marie from high school. The one who had dreams in her head, who wanted to change the world. I'm happy to see her again today." His words touched me more than I thought possible. "She took a while to come back," I replied softly, "but she's here now." The weeks passed, and I found myself impatiently awaiting our weekly meetings with Antoine. We used to meet every Saturday morning for a coffee and a walk in Paris. It was as if we caught all of these lost years, rediscovering our friendship in a new light. One Saturday, while we wandered along the docks of the Seine, Antoine stopped suddenly. "Marie," he said, her sudden tone serious, "I have to tell you something. My heart will be hugged." Was he going to tell me that our meetings had to stop? What did his wife approve of our friendship? I think I'm falling in love with you, he said in one go. I remained frozen, unable to answer. Antoine, my childhood friend, in love with me? I know it's complicated, he continued quickly. You barely come out of a divorce, I have a family. But I couldn't keep that for me. You deserve to know the truth. I have a deep inspiration, trying to put my thoughts in order. Antoine, I started slowly. I don't know what to say. You plan a lot for me, but you're not in love with me, he ended up with a sad little smile. I shook my head. It's not that. It's just that. I need time. To find myself, to heal. And you have a family. Antoine nodded, understanding. I understand, Marie. I don't ask you anything. I just wanted to be honest with you. We stayed there for a moment, looking at the Seine pouring in front of us. Finally, I took his hand in mine. Thank you, Antoine. For your honesty, for your friendship. It counts more than you can imagine. He hugged my hand in return, a smile on his lips. I will always be there for you, Marie. Whatever happens. This conversation with Antoine made me think for days. I was touched by his feelings, even flattered. But was I ready for a new relationship? Was my heart cured of the injuries inflicted by Francois? One evening, when I came home from work, I crossed my neighbor, Mrs. Lefevre, an elderly lady always full of wisdom. Good evening, Marie, she greeted me with a warm smile. You look concerned tonight. I sighed. Good evening, Mrs. Lefevre. It's complicated. She looked at me with kindness. Love is always complicated, my dear. But that's what makes it so precious. I looked at her, surprised. How? She laughed softly. I lived for a long time, Marie. I recognized the gaze of a woman who wonders about love. We stayed for a moment on the landing, chatting. The words of Mrs. Lefevre resonated in me. Do not be afraid to love again, Marie. The heart has an infinite capacity to heal and love. That night, lying in my bed, I think about everything that has happened in recent months. I had rebuilt my professional life, returned to links with my family and friends. Perhaps it was time to let love enter my life again. The next morning, I took my phone and composed Antoine's number. Hello, Antoine? It's Marie. I think we should speak. While I hung up, I felt a wave of excitement and apprehension hit me. I was about to open a new chapter in my life. And for the first time for a long time, I was impatient to see what the future had in store for me. Parisian winter had settled, enveloping the city with a coat of cold and grayness. However, in my heart, it was spring. My conversation with Antoine had opened new possibilities, new horizons that I had not dared to consider for a long time. We had decided to take things slowly, to let our relationship evolve naturally. Each meeting was a discovery, an exciting mixture of familiarity and novelty. Antoine was patient, understanding, always attentive to my needs and my hesitations. One evening in December, when we walked hand in hand along the illuminated Champs-Élysées for Christmas, Antoine stopped suddenly. Marie, he said, his eyes brilliant with a glow that I started to know well, I know we said that we would take our time, but I love you as I never liked anyone. My heart jumped into my chest. Part of me wanted to throw himself into his arms, tell him that I loved him too. But another part, the one that still wore the scars of my marriage to Francois, hesitated. Antoine, I replied gently, I keep you very much. But he put a finger on my lips, interrupting me gently. You don't need to answer now. I just wanted you to know it. I'm ready to wait as long as it takes. That night, lying in my bed, I thought back to all the way since my separation with Francois. I had rebuilt my life, room per piece. I had a job I loved, friends I could count on, an emerging relationship with a wonderful man. And yet something still held me. The next morning, arriving at the office, I was greeted by unusual agitation. My chief, Mr. Dupont, was waiting for me at the door of his office. Marie, he said as soon as he saw me, I have an important news to tell you. My heart will be hugged. Did I lose my post? Did the company know difficulties? We decided to promote you, he continued with a big smile. You will now be director of the development project for our new range of electric vehicles. I was speechless, unable to answer for a few seconds. Sir, I finally stammered, I don't know what to say. Thank you. Don't thank me, he replied, laughing. You have deserved this promotion. Your work in recent months has been exceptional. This promotion was a recognition of all my efforts, of every night spent working late, of every weekend sacrificed. It was proof that I was right to believe in me, to fight for my career. The same evening, I invited Antoine to dinner to tell him the news. We found ourselves in a small Italian restaurant in the Latin district, our favorite. Antoine, I said after we have ordered, I have great news to tell you. His eyes lit up with anticipation. I listened to you. I told him everything: promotion, new responsibilities, salary increase. As I spoke, I saw her face light up with pride and joy. Marie, it's fantastic, he exclaimed when I finished. I'm so proud of you. This is when I understood. Seeing Antoine's sincere joy, his unconditional support, I realized that I was ready. Ready to love again, ready to trust. Antoine, I say gently, taking his hand in mine, I love you too. His face illuminated with pure, without restraint. He leaned over the table and kissed me, ignoring the amused looks of other customers. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of happiness and excitement. Between my new position at Renault and my flourishing relationship with Antoine, I felt like I was living an awake dream. However, as a reminder that life is never a long, quiet river, I received a call from my lawyer in January morning. Ms. Dubois, he said in a deep voice, I have news about your divorce. I sat down, feeling a ball formed in my stomach. I listened to you, master. Mr. Dupont finally agreed to negotiate. He proposed an amicable agreement to avoid a trial. I remained silent for a moment, digesting the information. What are his conditions? My lawyer explained the details of Francois's offer to me. It was far from fair, but it would avoid a long and expensive trial. What do you think? I asked finally. Honestly, he replied, this is not the most advantageous agreement for you. But it would allow you to turn the page permanently. I think for a few days, weighing the pros and cons. I spoke for a long time with Antoine, who listened to me carefully without trying to influence my decision. Finally, I decided to accept Francois's offer. It was not so much for money as for peace of mind. I wanted to close this chapter of my life once and for all. On the day of the signing of the divorce papers, I went to the court with a mixture of apprehension and relief. Francois was already there, looking tired and bitter. Hello, Francois, I said politely, sitting in front of him. He looked at me for a moment before answering. Hello, Marie. You look in good shape. I just nodded, not wanting to extend the more than necessary conversation. While we were waiting for the arrival of our respective lawyers, Francois broke the silence. You know, my mother has never recovered from your departure. I looked at him, surprised by this attempted conversation. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied sincerely. How is she? He shrugged his shoulders. She ages. She is more and more dependent. I felt a point of guilt, quickly replaced by the realization that it was no longer my responsibility. I hope you take care of her, I said just. Francois had a bitter laugh. As if I had a choice. At that time, our lawyers arrived, ending our conversation. The signature of the papers was fast and without hitch. In less than an hour, it was over. I was officially divorced. Leaving court, I took a deep inspiration. The cold air of January fills my lungs, invigorating and purifier. I felt light, as if a huge weight had just been removed from my shoulders. Antoine was waiting for me a few steps away, leaning against his car. Seeing me, he straightened up, a worried smile on the lips. That's it, I said when I got to his height. It's over. He took me in his arms, hugging me against him. How do you feel? He asked softly. I think for a moment before answering. Free, I said finally. I feel free. That night, lying in Antoine's arms, I thought back to the whole path traveled. A year ago, I was a broken woman, trapped in a toxic marriage, having lost all self-confidence. Today, I was strong, independent, loved for whom I was really. What do you think? Antoine whispered, gently caressing my hair. I turned to him, plunging my gaze into his. I think in the future, I replied. Our future. He smiles, his eyes brilliant with love and promises. He will be wonderful, he said simply. And for the first time in a long time, I really thought it. The future was full of possibilities, hope and love. I had crossed the storm and I was out of it. Now it was up to me to write the rest of my story. While I fell asleep in Antoine's arms, I felt deep peace spoke to me. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of my life. And I was ready to face it, whatever happens. The Parisian spring was at its peak, pairing the city of bright colors and intoxicating scents. The cherries in flowers along the Seine offered an enchanting spectacle, as if nature itself celebrated my renewal. A year had passed since my divorce, a year rich in changes and discoveries. My relationship with Antoine had flourished, becoming stronger and deeper every day. My work at Renault filled me, allowing me to push my limits and carry out projects that I would never have dared to dream before. That morning, I woke up with a particular excitement. Antoine and I decided to take a new step. We were going to move together. We had found a charming apartment in the 7th arrondissement, with a view of the Eiffel Tower. It was a new chapter that opened, full of promises and hope. While I was preparing coffee in my kitchen for the last time, my phone rang. It was Lucy, my sister. Married, she exclaimed as soon as I picked up. I hope I don't wake you up. I laugh. No, don't worry. I've been standing for a while. The big day, do you remember? How could I forget? She replied with enthusiasm. My big sister who moves with the man of his life. It's so exciting. We discussed for a few minutes, Lucy wishing me good luck for the moving and making me promote to invite her as soon as we are installed. After hanging up, I finished my preparations. Most of my things were already packed in boxes, patiently waiting to be transported to their new home. I made a last round of the apartment, stopping in each room to say goodbye to this place which had been my refuge, my haven of peace during this tumultuous period of my life. Antoine arrived around 10 a.m., accompanied by 2 of his friends who had volunteered to help us. The move took place in a good mood, punctuated by laughter and small coffee breaks. Towards the end of the afternoon, while we unload the last boxes in our new apartment, Antoine took me separately. Marie, he said, a mysterious smile on his lips, I have a surprise for you. Intrigued, I followed it to the living room. There, in the middle of the room still crowded with boxes, was a magnificent tail piano. Antoine, I exclaimed, tears in my eyes. How? When? He took me in his arms, visibly delighted with his surprise. You told me that you were playing when you were younger, that you were missing. I thought it would be a good way to start our new life together. Moved, I approached the piano, gently caressing the ivory touches. It had been years since I had played, having abandoned this passion during my marriage to Francois. I sat on the stool and started playing. The first notes were hesitant, clumsy, but quickly, my fingers found their marks. Debussy's Moon Claire melody filled the room, transporting all those present. When I finished playing, Antoine and his friends applauded warmly. I got up, the red cheeks of emotion, and hugged Antoine in my arms. Thank you, I whispered. It is the best gift that I have ever been given. The days that followed were devoted to the development of our new home. Each object found its place, each decision was made together, creating a space that looked like us. One evening, when we were sitting on our new sofa, savoring a glass of wine after a long day of work, Antoine turned to me with a serious air. Marie, he began, there is something I would like to tell you about. My heart leaps. Was it what I thought? I listened to you, I said, trying to keep a calm voice. Here, he continued, taking my hand in his. I know that we have never really talked about a long-term future, but I would like to start a family with you. I remained silent for a moment, surprised not by his request, but by my own reaction. A few months ago, the idea of having children would have terrified me. But now, with Antoine, it seemed natural, even obvious. Me too, I finally replied, a smile on our lips. I would like it very much. Antoine's face illuminated with happiness. He took me in his arms, kissing me with passion. The weeks that followed were filled with discussions on our future, shared projects, and dreams. We decided to take our time, to enjoy a little more of our life for two before embarking on the adventure of parenting. One morning in June, when I was preparing to go to work, I received an unexpected call. It was Françoise. Married? Her voice seemed hesitant, almost shy. I hope I don't mind. No, I replied, surprised. What's going on, François? There was a moment of silence before he spoke. I just wanted to apologize. For everything. I have thought a lot in recent months, and I realize how unfair I have been to you. I was amazed. I would never have imagined to hear these words from the mouth of François. Thank you, François, I said finally. It matters a lot to me. We talked for a few more minutes, exchanging news from our respective lives. When I hung up, I felt slightly, as if the last weight weighing on my heart had just taken off. That evening, I told this conversation to Antoine. He listened to me carefully, hugging me. How do you feel? He asked gently when I finished. I think for a moment before answering. In peace, I said finally. I feel in peace. Summer passed through a whirlwind of happiness. Antoine and I take full advantage of our life together, exploring Paris as if we discovered it for the first time, spending weekends in the countryside, doing projects for the future. One evening in September, when we took a hand in hand along the quays of the Seine, Antoine stopped suddenly. He turned to me, a solemn air on his face. Marie, he said, taking my two hands in hers, these last months have been the happiest of my life. You have made me rediscover love, confidence, simple happiness to be with someone who really understands you. My heart began to beat faster. I felt that something important was going to happen. Antoine knee on the ground, taking out a small box from his pocket. Marie Dubois, he continued, opening the box to reveal a magnificent ring. Do you want to marry me? Tears rose to me. All my life paraded before me in an instant, difficult moments, struggles, but also joy, love, renaissance. And now, this wonderful man who asked me to share his life. Yes, I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. Yes, I want it. Antoine slid the ring to my finger before getting up to kiss me. Around us, passers-by applauded, touched by this romantic scene. That night, lying in Antoine's arms, I thought back to the whole path traveled. 2 years ago, I was a broken woman, trapped in an unhappy marriage, having lost all confidence in herself and in the future. Today, I was strong, fulfilled, loved for whom I was really. I realized that each test, each difficulty had actually made me stronger. My divorce, as painful as it was, had been the catalyst I needed to regain control of my life. The future stretched in front of me, full of promises and possibilities. I was going to marry a man who loved me and respected me. My career was flourishing. I had returned strong ties to my family and friends. But more than anything, I had learned the most important lesson. Happiness does not depend on the others, it comes from the inside. I had learned to love myself, to believe in my abilities, to never give up my dreams. While I fell asleep, rocked by the regular breathing of Antoine, I felt filled with deep peace and palpable excitement for the future. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of my life. A life that I had chosen, a life that I had built, a life of which I was proud. And whatever the adventure that awaited me, I was ready to face it. Because now I knew I was able to overcome any storm. I was Marie Dubois, a strong, independent and loved woman. And my story was just beginning.